You are Heinrich Schneider, 19 years old, born on a small farm in West Prussia. You've never left your village, never held a rifle, never thought about killing a man. But it's August 1914 now, and Europe is slipping into madness. You're out in the fields pulling potatoes from the dirt when the boy from the telegraph office comes running. He's red-faced and breathless, doesn't say a word, just hands you the folded paper and runs off again. You wipe your hands on your trousers and unfold it. The ink is smudged. You read it once, then again. The word sticks in your mind like a hammer blow. Mobilmachung. Mobilization. That night, your mother makes stew, though none of you are hungry. Your younger brother Otto doesn't understand what's happening. He keeps asking if you're going away on holiday. You smile and ruffle his hair. Your father sits at the table in silence, eyes fixed on the wall. In the early morning, you stand at the station. The train hisses like a dying beast. All around you are boys your age, some younger, trying to act brave. Some have cigarettes in their mouths. Others grip little wooden crosses around their necks. No one speaks. The train lurches. Someone plays a harmonica, the tune cheerful and wrong. You watch trees slide by through the window, and all you can think about is whether the train will bring you home again, or carry you into a grave. At the barracks, they strip your name from you and replace it with a number. Your hair is shaved. Your uniform is too big. The boots are stiff and too tight. You're taught how to march, how to clean your rifle, how to stab with a bayonet. You stab straw dummies over and over again until your arms go numb. You wonder if the real thing will feel the same. You hope it won't. You sleep in a room with 30 others. The snoring, the coughing, the crying, it's never quiet. One night, someone whispers that the British have already landed in France. Another says the war will be over by Christmas. You don't know who to believe. You barely know who you are anymore. A letter comes from home. It's from your mother. She writes that the cow gave birth, that Otto misses you, that the neighbor boy Franz has already enlisted and was sent to the Eastern Front. She says she hopes you're warm and safe. You fold the letter 4 times and keep it in your chest pocket like a shield. The boots are breaking in. The uniform doesn't feel as strange. But something inside you is changing too. You stop thinking of the men around you as strangers. You start calling them by name. Some of them make you laugh. One of them gives you his last cigarette. Another teaches you a prayer in Latin he swears keeps bullets away. Then one morning, just before dawn, the whistle blows. You stand in line. Your pack is heavy. Your rifle weighs more than it should. You look down at your boots. They are muddy, cracked at the edges. You wonder if you'll still be wearing them when this is all over. No one speaks. The train is waiting. You step forward. Your life is behind you now. Ahead is something else entirely. You are no longer just Heinrich. You are a soldier of the Imperial German Army. The train rattles through the countryside for hours. The windows are open, but the air is thick and smells of sweat, iron, and coal. No one really talks. Some stare out at the fields passing by. Others try to sleep, heads pressed against the wooden walls of the rail car. You try to read your mother's letter again, but the train jolts too much and your eyes are too tired. At one stop, a Red Cross nurse hands out apples. She smiles as she passes, but her eyes don't match the smile. They look like she's already seen too much. A few older men wave from the platform. Some of them fought in 1870, you're told. You wonder what they see when they look at you. A soldier, a son. When the train finally slows down, it's evening. The sun hangs low and red. The sky looks like it's bleeding. You're ordered off, shouted into lines, marched through mud and smoke. In the distance you hear thunder. At least you think it's thunder, until someone whispers, "That's not weather. That's the guns." They take you to the trenches that night. You had imagined something more heroic. What you see is filth. A long wound in the earth, choked with water and rot. Men move like ghosts. Their uniforms are brown with mud. Some are missing buttons. One has no boots. The smell hits you like a slap. Damp earth, mold, urine, something else. Something dead. You climb down into it. Your boots sink immediately. Rats scurry over your feet like they belong here more than you do. A man with a bandage across half his face passes by without looking at you. You try not to stare. Another soldier offers you a spot to sit, on an overturned crate near a pool of dark water. You don't ask what's in the water. You sit. That night you don't sleep. It's not the cold or the rats or the endless drip 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 of water down the trench walls. It's the sounds. Artillery in the distance. The rustling of bodies. The coughing. The quiet sobbing. Every now and then a shout. Once a scream. Then silence again. In the early hours the sky turns gray. A whistle blows. You're handed a helmet and told, "Prepare to go over." You don't even know what that means until you see the ladder. One of the older men explains it without looking at you. We climb. We run. We hope we don't get cut down. You grip your rifle. Your hands won't stop shaking. Your heart feels like it's in your throat. The officer yells something, but you barely hear it. You're staring at the top of the ladder. Beyond it is no man's land. Then the whistle blows again, sharper this time. The man beside you climbs. Then the next. Then the next. It's your turn. You climb. Mud under your boots. Rifle clutched to your chest. You reach the top and pull yourself over the edge. What you see is a nightmare. Barbed wire twisted like thorns. Craters full of water. Bodies. Smoke. Screams. Gunfire. You run without thinking. They're shouting all around you. Bullets whip past. One man falls beside you, arms outstretched. Another trips on the wire and never gets back up. You don't stop. You can't. Your legs are burning. Your lungs feel full of smoke. You aim your rifle and fire, though you don't know if you hit anything. The enemy trench is still far ahead, but someone yells to fall back. You turn. You run. You don't remember when you dropped your rifle. Back in the trench, your body shakes. Your uniform is soaked through. You see someone curled up, rocking back and forth. You don't realize it's you until someone pulls you upright and slaps your face. World. You stop noticing the rats unless they bite. You stop noticing the lice unless they swarm. You eat when food comes, sleep when your body shuts down, and pray the shells land somewhere else. Sometimes it's quiet. Too quiet. That's when you start to worry. The quiet never lasts. Sooner or later, the rumble returns. The low growl of artillery waking up in the distance like a storm moving closer. Then the whistling, rising, shrieking, and the world explodes in sound. Shells fall like rain. Mud sprays into the sky. Chunks of something, wood, metal, maybe bone, fly past your face. You keep your head down, mouth open, fists clenched. Someone screams for his mother, but you don't look. You've learned not to look. When it ends, the world goes still again. You lift your head. Smoke hangs like fog. Pieces of trench wall are gone. So are some of the men. One of them was the boy who showed you how to clean your rifle. He's just gone. You start writing letters home but never know what to say. Why? You say you're well. You say the food is good. You say you're proud to be doing your duty. But sometimes, just sometimes, you almost write the truth. That your hands shake all the time. That you dream of being buried alive. That you think you forgot the sound of birds. Mail is slow. Letters come weeks late. One is from Otto. It's written in crooked handwriting. He says the neighbor's dog had puppies and that he named one after you. You read it over and over until it starts to tear at the edges. You fold it gently and keep it inside your jacket with your mother's letter. When it rains, and it always rains, you wrap them in cloth to keep them dry. The trench is more water than ground now. Your feet are white and soft from the wet, your boots always filled with muck. One night you wake up to find something moving across your foot. You shake it off and light a match. The rat is as big as a cat, bold, not afraid of you at all. You throw a rock at it. It hisses and vanishes. You haven't fired your rifle in 2 days, but you still clean it every night. It's habit now, almost like prayer. You don't even remember when you last saw an enemy face. The war doesn't come like that anymore. It comes from the sky, from the ground, from far away. A whisper of gas one day. A sniper's bullet the next. Gas is the worst. There's no warning. Someone shouts and everyone fumbles for masks. The masks smell like rubber and sweat and fear. You can't breathe right and your hands are shaking and the air burns your throat even through the filter. One man didn't get his mask on in time. You watched him claw at his neck until he stopped moving. He was 18. Sometimes new recruits arrive. They look like you did once. Clean uniforms, wide eyes, proud smiles. You barely speak to them anymore. They don't last long. You learn strange things, like how to sleep sitting up, how to tell the difference between incoming and outgoing shells by sound alone, how to tell when someone's too far gone to save, how to eat bread with mold, how to tell whether it's raining or if the trench wall is just leaking again. You stop asking when it'll be over. You stop wondering if you'll go home. You start wondering if the world outside the trench even exists anymore. But still, somehow you survive. One day at a time. One shell at a time. One step closer to forgetting who you were before you climbed that first ladder. Winter arrives like a punishment. Not with snow at first, but with a cold that settles into your bones and stays there. The mud in the trenches turns to thick, icy slush that clings to everything. Your fingers are always numb. Your breath turns to mist, and it never feels like your lungs are full anymore. You wear every layer you own, shirt, tunic, greatcoat, but it's never enough. At night, men huddle together just to stay warm. Pride vanished weeks ago. Your boots are falling apart. The soles flap when you walk. Trench foot spreads like disease. One morning, the man next to you wakes up screaming. His toes are black. The medic takes a look, says nothing, and just starts rapping. You see the same look in the medic's eyes that you've seen in the wounded. He's surviving, but barely. No one is whole anymore. You go on patrol sometimes. Out into no man's land, through the wires and frost, in total silence. You crawl on your stomach through frozen mud, flinching at every sound. Once you see a man's body frozen solid, hand stretched out like he was trying to reach something. You don't look at his face. Sometimes you find letters on the bodies. You've stopped reading them. It feels like opening someone's grave. One night, a man on your patrol gets hit in the throat by a stray shot. He bleeds into the snow, gasping like a fish. You hold his hand until it goes limp. You don't remember his name. On Christmas Eve, the shelling stops. Not just for a few hours, for the whole night. It's silent. And then, unbelievably, you hear something. Across no man's land. A German voice, quiet at first, singing Still Nacht. Then another. Then more. Someone laughs. You think you might be dreaming. You press your back to the trench wall, hand on your rifle, waiting for the trick. But nothing happens. The next morning, a British soldier stands up from the opposite trench. He's unarmed. He waves. For a few seconds, no one moves. Then one of your own climbs up and walks out into the field. You think it's suicide. But they shake hands. They talk. That day, for the first time in months, you see the enemy not as a shadow in the mist, but as a man. Boy, really. He has freckles and a photo of his sister in his pocket. You don't speak his language, but it doesn't matter. You trade cigarettes. He gives you chocolate. You give him your spare gloves. For one day the war stops. That night, back in your trench, someone whispers, maybe they'll call it off. No one answers. By morning it's over. The shelling returns before dawn. Someone yells that the truce was a trick. Another curses God. You hunch back into your dugout, light a damp cigarette, and pretend you didn't meet the boy with freckles. It's easier that way. You've started forgetting things now. What day it is. What month. How long you've been here. What normal smells like. Sometimes you think of your house, but it feels like a story someone told you once. Not real. Not anymore. You've changed. Everyone has. There's a look in your eyes now when you catch your reflection in a bit of glass or a puddle. You didn't have it before. Not at the train station. Not on the first night. You've seen too much. Felt too much. Lost too much. But you're still alive. Spring comes not with warmth but with rot. The frost melts and the trenches flood. The mud returns, thicker and heavier than before, swallowing boots and sometimes whole bodies. Dead things long frozen begin to thaw. The smell is unbearable. You try not to breathe through your nose. You tie a dirty rag over your face, but it doesn't help. Nothing helps. The rats grow fat. They're bold now, confident. You wake up one morning to find one chewing at your pack strap. You sweat it away and it scurries off like you're the intruder, not it. You wonder what they feed on when the rations run low. You try not to think too hard. Shells fall daily now. Sometimes at night, sometimes at dawn, sometimes in the middle of meals. They don't need a reason anymore. You can feel the difference now. You know by instinct when it's close, when to duck, when to throw yourself down. The new recruits don't know yet. They learn quickly or they don't. One morning, your section is ordered to take a forward position. Supposed to be abandoned. Just a patrol, they said. A formality. You move out before sunrise, crawling through muck, hugging the shadows. Then the machine guns open up. You hit the ground hard. Mud sprays into your mouth. The world becomes sound and terror and screaming metal. The man in front of you is cut down in a second. The man behind you is hit in the leg and starts crying for his father. You drag him back. You don't know why. He's not your friend. You barely know his name. But his eyes look like Otto's, and for a moment that's enough. He survives. You get a letter a few weeks later, smuggled back from the field hospital. His name was Carl. He calls you a hero. You don't feel like one. The weeks drag on. You start dreaming of trees. Just trees. No mud, no noise, no walls of dirt. Just standing beneath green leaves and hearing the wind. You wonder if you'll ever see a tree again. The officers say the war will turn soon. That the Americans are coming. That the enemy is tired. That victory is near. You've heard this before. You don't believe it. You stop caring who wins. Some days the enemy trench is so close you can hear them talking. You recognize their coughs, their laughter, even their cries. They're not so different. They're just as tired, just as afraid. Then one morning you're told to charge again. No speech, no ceremony, just the whistle and the climb. You run. You run like your soul depends on it. You dodge the holes. You leap the wire. You fire your rifle though you barely aim. Something hits your shoulder. You don't fall. You keep moving. You're not even sure why. When it's over, you're in the trench you were told to take. It's empty. You sit down against the wall and realize your hands are covered in someone else's blood. You think of home. You think of the kitchen and the wood stove and your mother's soup. And then just like that, word comes. The war is ending. No parades. No fireworks. Just whispers passed from trench to trench. Then it's official. An armistice. You don't cheer. You just sit there. Feels unreal. Like someone forgot to blow the whistle this morning. You don't know what to do. You pack your things slowly, like someone moving out of a house they don't remember moving into. Your hands tremble as you fold your coat. You keep the letters from your mother and Otto. You leave the rest. The march home is long. The roads are broken. The towns are scarred. People cheer as you pass, but it sounds far away. Some look at you like you're a hero. Some don't look at all. They wouldn't recognize the boy who left. He's not coming back. When you finally reach your village, it's quiet. Smaller than you remember. Your house is still there. Otto runs to meet you, older now, taller. Your mother cries when she sees you. Your father shakes your hand and doesn't speak. That night you sleep in a bed. A real bed. No gunfire. No cold. No rats. But sleep doesn't come easily. You lie awake, staring at the ceiling. The silence is loud. Too loud. You think of the faces. The names. The ones who didn't come back. You survived the war. You wake before dawn, the room's still dark. For a moment you forget where you are. The ceiling, the walls, the stillness. It feels unfamiliar. You half expect to hear boots splashing through mud, a whistle cutting the air, the low hum of distant guns. But there's only silence. Real silence. It unsettles you. The mornings come slowly now. You eat with your family, though your appetite is never quite right. Your mother smiles too much, like if she stops you might break. Otto asks questions, but not the ones that matter. Your father doesn't ask anything at all. He just watches you, nods when you speak, and turns back to his tools. You find work, eventually. Chores around the farm. Repairing things that should have been fixed years ago. You keep your hands busy. It helps. Sometimes. Other times you catch yourself staring into the fields, half expecting a flare to light up the sky. Your heart still jumps at loud sounds. A slammed door. A dropped pan. The thunder. There are others like you in town. Other survivors. You nod at each other in the streets. You don't speak much. What could you say? Words feel too small for what you've carried. Some of them drink. Others disappear into the woods. A few wear their medals, though most don't. You never even pick yours up. The world around you moves on too fast. People talk of rebuilding, of peace, of the future. But for you, time feels frozen. You still live between the barges and the silence. You wake up sweating some nights, fists clenched, heart racing. You hear names in your sleep. Sometimes you say them aloud. Sometimes you cry and don't know why. You try to write again. Letters, then a journal. You think if you can just put it on paper, maybe it'll make sense. But the words don't come easily. How do you explain something like that? How do you describe fear that lives under your skin? One day you walk past a school and hear children laughing. It stops you in your tracks. It sounds so clean, so bright. You feel something twist in your chest. Something like grief, but also something softer. Hope, maybe. Or the memory of it. You think about the boy you were before the war. The one who thought uniforms made men and medals made heroes. That boy died somewhere in the mud between the wire and the craters. But you lived. Somehow. In pieces. In silence. But you lived. Years pass. You marry. You raise a son. You hold him close when he cries, and sometimes when he asks about the war, you tell him little things. The food. The cold. The mud. You don't tell him about the screaming. About the boy whose name you never learned, who bled out in your lap. About the look in a dying man's eyes when he realizes he'll never see home again. You tell him enough to make him understand war is not glory. That it is not banners and bugles and shining medals. It is fear and filth and surviving when others didn't. And that surviving means remembering always. You keep the letters from your mother and Otto, now yellowed and fraying, in a small box beside your bed. Some nights you read them again. You hold them gently like something sacred, like something fragile. You never forget the war. It lives in you in ways others can't see. But life somehow goes on. And when you finally close your eyes for the last time many years later, it is not in a trench, under fire, surrounded by mud and rats and death. It is in a quiet room, warm and still, with the sound of wind in the trees outside your window. You survived the war. But more importantly, you survived the peace. The years after the war pass slowly but steadily. The world changes around you. Automobiles become more common. Radios arrive. The old horse-drawn carts disappear from the village roads, replaced by engines and smoke. Your neighbors grow older. Some don't return from the war, and their homes are sold or left empty. People stop talking about them after a while. But you don't forget. You walk to the cemetery sometimes. There's a section now, rows of white markers neatly lined. You visit the ones you remember, the ones you can. Sometimes you stand in front of a stone with no name, just a number. You wonder if he was someone you passed once in the trench, someone who shared a cigarette or gave you his last piece of bread. You don't know, but you stand there anyway. Once a year, on the anniversary, they hold a small ceremony. You go at first. You wear your old uniform coat, though it's tight across the chest now. You stand at attention when the names are read. But each year fewer people come, and eventually you stop going too. You honor them in your own way now. Quietly, privately. You find joy again, though it's never loud. It's in the smell of the soil after rain, in the way your wife hums while she knits, in the way your son stumbles over his reading, then grins when he gets it right. You learn to smile without guilt, to laugh without shame. But some part of you always waits. For a sound. For a flash. For something to bring it all back. It never fully goes. The war left fingerprints on your soul, too deep to scrub away. But they fade. Enough. When your son grows older, he asks more questions. You're more honest now. You tell him about the cold. The way your hands went numb in the winter and you thought they'd snap off. About how you dug through the dirt with fingers raw to make space for a comrade's body. About the day the boy beside you couldn't take it anymore and walked into no man's land without a weapon, just vanished into smoke. Your son listens. His eyes are wide and he doesn't interrupt. He hugs you afterward, says nothing, just holds you. You feel something loosen in your chest. Something you didn't know was still clenched. Decades pass. Your hair turns white. The mirror shows a face lined with years and ghosts. but also with a kind of peace. You spend more time on the porch listening to the birds. You tend the garden. The same earth that once tried to swallow you now grows tomatoes, sunflowers, onions. Life always finds a way. And one morning, when the sun is low and golden, you sit with your grandson on your lap. He points to a scar on your hand and asks what happened. You smile, trace it with your thumb, and say, "That's from a war a long time ago." He asks if you were scared. You think for a moment. Then you say, "Yes, but I came home." He nods as if that answer is enough. Maybe it is. You hold him close and realize, the war didn't win. You did. The rhythm of your life becomes soft and predictable. Morning, a walk through the fields, reading by the window. You find comfort in the ordinary, in routines that once seemed meaningless but now feel sacred. The world keeps changing outside your small home. New leaders rise, new wars begin elsewhere, but none touch you the way the Great War did. None ever could. Sometimes veterans pass through town. Men with familiar eyes who carry themselves with a quiet weight. You nod at each other. A silent understanding. No need for words. You've all buried pieces of yourselves in those foreign fields. You all carry ghosts in your coat pockets. One summer, a young man from the city comes to interview you. He says he's writing a book on the war, wants to speak to those who lived it. He's polite, earnest. You agree, though you're hesitant. He sits across from you in the parlor, notebook in hand, eyes eager. He asks questions. What was it like? Did you believe in the cause? Did you hate the enemy? Did you feel brave? You take your time answering. You tell him some stories, carefully chosen. You mention the mud, the cold, the fear. The laughter that sometimes came despite it all. You speak of the Christmas truce, of a letter from home, of a shared chocolate bar between enemies. You leave out the worst parts. Not to hide them, but because they're not for books. They're for memory. For the silence between heartbeats. When he leaves, he thanks you, says you've helped him understand history better. You nod and wish him well. After he's gone, you sit in the quiet for a long while. You light your pipe. You think not about history, but about faces, names, laughter in the trenches. A boy named Carl, a freckled enemy, a friend whose song you still remember. In your final years, your body slows, but your mind stays sharp. You speak less, but when you do, your words carry weight. People listen. Your son cares for you now, gently, with reverence. Your grandchildren visit. They bring stories of school, of mischief, of dreams. They sit at your feet as you tell them about a world without phones or planes, when mail came by train and meals were made from scratch. You speak of the past with care, not just the war, but the peace that followed. How hard it was, how long it took, how worth it became. And one evening, as the sun dips behind the trees and the sky turns gold, you lie back in your bed and listen to the wind. You can smell the lilacs blooming outside your window. You can hear the leaves rustling, the distant voices of children playing, the hum of life continuing. You think of all that you saw, all that you lost, all that you held on to. You think, I came through it all. You breathe in deeply and let go, surrounded by peace, by family, by silence that no longer frightens you. You survived the war. You lived the peace. And in the end, you were more than a soldier. You were human. Our passing is quiet. No fanfare, no grand speeches. Just a gentle sigh, a stillness, and the slow hush of a life fully lived. Your family mourns, of course. They cry, they remember, they share stories about you. The way you always whistled when you worked. The way your eyes softened when you spoke about your brother. The way you could never quite get used to the taste of coffee again after the trenches. They bury you beneath the old oak tree in the small village cemetery. Not far from your parents. Not far from the boys who never came back. A simple headstone. Your name. Your dates. And beneath them, 5 quiet words chosen by your son. He came home. He endured. In time, your grandchildren grow. They go off to cities, to universities, to new lives you'd barely recognize. But they carry you with them. In the stories their parents told, in the scarred letters preserved in boxes, in the stillness with which they honor old men who sit alone on park benches. And your story, your war, your peace, becomes part of something larger. A century later, a museum displays a rusted mess tin with your initials scratched into the bottom, a cracked photo of your company, a faded letter you once wrote by candlelight in a dugout. Schoolchildren pass by the display and read about your regiment, the battles you fought, the winter of suffering, the Christmas of singing. To them it's history. But to one child standing quietly at the glass, something clicks. He sees more than old artifacts. He sees a young man like himself, once scared, once brave, once cold, once alive. He imagines the wind on the Western Front, the weight of a pack, the terror of the whistle, and he wonders, not what it was like to kill, but what it was like to survive. He goes home and asks his grandfather about the war. Not just the fighting, but the coming back, the trying to sleep, the silence. And just like that, your story lives again. Because you didn't just survive. You left something behind. A reminder that war is not just dates and maps and uniforms. It's mud and frost, courage and tears, memory and silence. It's the face of a friend in a crater, the hum of a song across the battlefield. It's learning how to live again after the dying stops. Your story becomes a quiet echo, passed on not in headlines but in hearts. Not for the glory but for the truth. And for those who wonder even now if they would have made it through that dark, endless storm, they look to your life and realize, maybe, just maybe, they could have survived too. Time presses on as it always does. The world you once knew, horse carts, telegrams, coal stoves, slips quietly into memory. Your house, passed down through the family, stands as a quiet monument. The walls hold whispers of you. The worn chair by the fireplace. The coat hanging by the door long after it's been untouched. The garden you planted blooms each spring. Tulips rising just as they did the year you came home. Your great-grandchildren visit sometimes. They race through the same fields you once walked after the war, laughing, chasing one another beneath the same sky that once carried the thunder of artillery. They don't understand yet what you saw, what you endured, but that's all right. That's how it should be. They run because you crawled. They laugh because you wept. Their joy is the quiet reward for all that pain. One day one of them, your namesake, asks about you. Not just the soldier, but the man. What kind of bread did he like? Did he sing? Did he cry when he was alone? What did he miss the most when he was at war? The old photo album comes out. Fingers trace over sepia-stained edges. A young man in uniform. Another of you holding a fishing pole. One of you in a garden with a little boy on your knee. That boy is now an old man himself, and his voice cracks as he tells your story. Not just the war, but the love, the rebuilding, the quiet bravery of ordinary days. He tells them how you never boasted, how you rarely spoke of killing, but often of friends. He says you'd pause when the wind rustled the trees and smile in a way that seemed to stretch across time. And how, when he once asked you what the war taught you, you said, that peace is not something given. It's something we earn. Every day we choose to live kindly in spite of what we remember. That becomes the line that stays with them. More than your medals, more than your uniform packed away in a trunk. Those words, simple and weighty, carry forward like a lantern through the dark. And long after your body is gone, long after the fields have changed and even the last veterans have passed, your story endures. Not in textbooks, but in the way your descendants hold each other during storms. In the way they pause at monuments. In the way they offer their hand when someone stumbles. You are no longer just a name carved into stone. You are the echo of resilience, of love, of what it means to come home broken and still choose to rebuild. So when someone years from now asks, could I have survived as a soldier in the Great War? The answer is more than whether they dodge bullets or endure frostbite or face death in the trenches. The real question is, could you survive the living afterward? Could you carry the memories, the guilt, the grief, and still rise each morning, plant seeds, raise a child, smile at the sun? You did. And because you did, they just might too. And so your legacy is no longer bound to the mud and blood of the trenches. It breathes in every act of quiet strength your family carries forward. There will be wars again, of course. The world doesn't learn all at once. But because of you, someone will hesitate before raising a hand in anger. Someone will remember that behind every uniform is a heart that beats, a soul that fears, a home that waits. That war doesn't end when the guns fall silent. It echoes for lifetimes in kitchen tables, in the way a man holds his child a little tighter, or in the way he stares too long at the horizon, hearing things no one else can. The museum that one child visited, he grows up. He writes stories now. He writes about you, not with your name but with your spirit. He tells the tale of the soldier who came home and became a gardener, of the man who fought not for glory but for the chance to live. His stories reach far across languages and borders. And somewhere in a country you once called the enemy, another child reads them. And they understand. Not with hatred but with empathy. Because you didn't just survive the war. You transformed it. You took its fire and made warmth for others. You took its silence and turned it into lullabies. One day, on a rainy afternoon, your great-great-granddaughter stands beneath your tree in the cemetery. She holds her daughter's hand and reads the stone aloud. He came home. He endured. The little girl doesn't fully understand, not yet. But she feels the weight of the moment. She picks a flower and lays it by the stone. Later, as they walk back, the child asks, "Did he win?" Her mother smiles. Not the smile of celebration, but the deep, aching kind that understands life's true victories. "Yes," she says softly. "He won the hardest part. He kept living." Because that's the truth, isn't it? The war could have taken everything. But it didn't. You lived. You healed. You remembered. And above all, you loved even when it hurt to. That's the kind of survival that outlives trenches and rifles and maps. That's the kind of survival that becomes legend, not through battles won, but through peace held, through kindness offered, through silence carried with grace. Your story may have begun in the mud, with gunpowder in your lungs and fear in your veins. But it ends here, in the hearts of those who carry your memory forward, not as a soldier alone, but as a whole human being. And through them, through the soft way they speak your name, you live forever. Years roll into decades, and history reshapes itself into textbooks, documentaries, and films. The First World War becomes a subject of study, debate, analysis. The names of generals, battles, treaties, they all find their place in the grand architecture of remembered history. But you remain in the margins, where real stories live, where truth is too fragile for headlines. Your descendants pass your story along not in lectures, but in quiet moments, over tea, in bedtime tales, in the way they look at a rainy day and wonder what you were doing on one just like it, 100 years ago, crouched in a trench, soaked to the bone, longing for a letter from home. They tell their children that you weren't a hero the way books define it. You were braver than that. You endured. You held on when others let go. You forgave when the world gave you every reason not to. You suffered, yes, but you never let suffering become your whole identity. You made room for love, for laughter, for gentleness. On the centennial of the armistice, your village holds a small service. A simple wreath is laid near your stone. Someone recites a poem written by a boy not much older than you were when you went to war. Birds chirp above. The grass bends in the wind. A few veterans, now old men themselves, stand in solemn quiet. Among them stands a teenager. He wears no uniform, carries no weapon. Just a journal. In it he's copied your story, handwritten in his own words. He's read it over and over. Not because it's thrilling, but because it feels real. Alive. He doesn't know your voice, your laugh, your scent. But he feels your presence, like a fire still glowing long after the logs have turned to ash. He writes something on the last page of the journal that evening. He walked through hell and somehow brought back something beautiful. One day that journal will sit on a shelf in a library or a classroom or maybe a war museum. And someone else, lost, curious, searching, will find it. They'll read the notes in the margins. They'll see the creases, the wear, the fingerprints. And just like that, you'll rise again, not in uniform but in memory, not to fight but to teach. You'll stand in the minds of strangers, not as a name etched on a stone, but as a man who survived something no one should have to and chose to plant peace in its place. And if someone asks again, could you survive as a soldier in the Great War? There will be no easy answer, because survival is more than not dying. It's returning home with your soul torn open and choosing every single day to stitch it closed. It's waking in the middle of the night, trembling, and still getting up in the morning to milk the cows, to kiss your child, to fix the gate. It's carrying every ghost, every wound, every frozen memory, and still choosing to be kind. And that quiet defiance of despair is how you truly won. Your story never really ends, because survival in its truest form means being remembered not for what broke you, but for how you chose to build again anyway. And so the seasons continue their quiet march. Snowfall, spring rain, golden harvests, and your memory folds itself into each one. Not as a loud tale, but as a steady presence, like the wind through tall grass or the creak of an old floorboard in the family home. Time does not erase you, it reshapes you. You become part of the stories that are passed down when the power goes out and the candles are lit. When the youngest asks, did people really fight like that? Did great-grandpa really walk all the way home after the war? And someone nods, their voice soft with reverence. Yes, he did. And he lived to plant apple trees after. Those trees still stand. Their branches bend each spring with blossoms white and pink and full of promise. No one remembers exactly when you planted them, only that you did, and that every harvest carries something of you in its sweetness. In a school one town over, your story is read aloud by a teacher who found an old copy of a journal, handed down and photocopied over generations. She reads it slowly, letting the pauses settle like dust. Some students squirm, some stare out the window, but one child listens differently, not for the explosions or battles, but for the silence in between, for the boy who cried in the trench and the man who later built a cradle for his first child. That child goes home and writes a poem, not about the war but about what comes after. And on a quiet night years later, that same child, now grown, stands in front of a crowd. Not a battlefield, not a trench, but a stage, with light and music and space. They recite, he fought not to conquer, but to come home to a sky without gunfire, a morning without sirens, a life where laughter could grow again. The room falls still, not in mourning but in awe, in respect. You've long since left the world, but you're still doing what you always did, holding space, teaching courage, quietly, gently showing the world what survival really means. It means waking up after nightmares and planting something that might grow. It means choosing to speak softly even after the world has screamed at you. It means telling your story, not to glorify suffering, but to make sure it's never forgotten. You are more than a soldier, more than a survivor. You are a bridge between horror and healing, a whisper passed from one generation to the next. Life, remember, be kind. And one day, long from now, someone will walk past your name in a book, on a plaque, maybe carved into an old oak bench in your village square. They'll pause, not because they knew you, but because they feel something. A warmth. They won't ask, did he kill? They'll ask, how did he live? And that will be your victory. Your story still breathing, long after the last shot faded. And as the world keeps turning, faster now, louder, more connected than ever, your quiet legacy remains untouched by time's urgency. It lives in moments that barely catch notice. A stranger offering their seat on a crowded train. A father holding his son a second longer before school. A young woman planting flowers at the base of a memorial, even though no one asked her to. A teacher pausing before a lesson on war, remembering that each number, each statistic was once someone like you. They may not speak your name, but they carry your spirit. Because survival, true survival, does something permanent to the soul. It teaches restraint in a world obsessed with noise. It teaches tenderness in a world that forgets how much damage silence can do. Every time someone chooses mercy over vengeance, every time someone picks up a book instead of a weapon, every time someone chooses to sit with another's pain rather than look away, you are there. Your story becomes part of a great invisible inheritance, not of land or medals or statues, but of wisdom, of empathy, of warning. And yet you are not frozen in the past. You are not just the soldier of a distant war. You are part of what shaped us, a still presence in the way we build peace, a reason we choose to remember. And even if the last person who ever met you is gone, your story remains. In the crumpled photograph tucked into an attic trunk, in the scent of wood smoke and damp earth that brings back a memory no one ever explained, in the way a boy ties his boots and looks in the mirror, wondering what courage really looks like. It looks like you, not charging into battle, but coming home anyway, planting trees, sitting through nightmares, raising children gently, letting yourself love again even with broken hands. So yes, the world has moved on. And no, it hasn't forgotten. Because somewhere, right now, someone is reading your story, and for the first time, they realize that survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about what you do after. How you walk back into the sunlight, scarred but standing, and say to yourself, I am still here. I am still choosing life. Years will pass, centuries even. Languages will change. Borders will shift. The tools of war will grow more terrible, more distant, more clinical. Drones may replace bayonets, and satellites may track every movement in real time, but none of it will erase the human cost. None of it will make the fear in a young soldier's heart any less real. And because of you, someone will still remember that truth. Not the generals or the battle plans, not the glory in some history book, but the human behind it all. The boy from a quiet village, the brother who promised he'd come home, the man who stood up in the mud again and again just to see one more sunrise. Your life becomes the lantern others carry into their own dark places. When another war looms, and it will, there will be those who call for it boldly, carelessly from podiums and palaces. But someone else, someone quieter, perhaps standing near the back, will remember your story. And they'll speak up, maybe trembling, maybe softly, but they will say, there is nothing romantic about trenches. They'll talk about frost-bitten feet, about blood in the snow, about the sound of a friend breathing his last, about the weight of memory, and they'll talk about what matters more, how you came back and chose to forgive, how you loved again, how you bent down long after the gunfire had faded, and pulled weeds from a garden with the same hands that once shook with fear. This is your true monument. Not a stone, not a medal, not a parade, but the fact that your pain was not wasted, that your endurance taught others how to be gentle with the world, that your strength was never about power, but patience. So even when your name is forgotten, even when your photograph fades to dust, even when your great-great-grandchildren no longer know which country you served for, what you gave will remain, in kindness, in peace, in the echo of a lullaby sung by someone who never went to war, but whose great-grandfather once did. And when they sing, they'll never know that the peace in their voice came from a trench, a frost-bitten morning, a letter home scrawled in shaking hands. But it did, because you lived, because you endured, because you came home and built a life that no bullet could destroy. That is the quiet answer to the question, could you survive as a soldier in World War I? Yes, but only if you remember that surviving is just the beginning. The real story begins after the war ends, and you lived it, all of it, fully, bravely, quietly, and for that, the world owes you everything. And even now, right now, as someone listens to this story with their headphones in, their eyes closed, their heart quietly opening to a past they've never lived, your spirit reaches out, not to haunt, but to hold, to remind them that history is not just what happened, but what still echoes. They hear the rain on the roof and imagine the drizzle on your helmet. They hear distant thunder and wonder if you ever flinched at the sound. They walk past a crowded street and picture you in a trench, surrounded by voices, some crying, some laughing, some never to speak again. And they carry it forward, not as guilt, not as fear, but as understanding. They start seeing the world differently. They notice the old man on the park bench and wonder what memories sit with him. They take an extra moment to write to someone they miss. They press their hand over their heart when a siren passes, not knowing why, but feeling something ancient stir inside them. You've become part of them in a way that facts never could. Not as a soldier in uniform, but as a human being who walked through fire and still found the courage to grow something out of ashes. That's how this story lives on. Not as a chapter in a book, but as a pulse beneath the skin of everyone who hears it. A gentle whisper. You can survive. You can rebuild. You can choose peace. It won't be easy. Never was for you. But if they carry your story close, in their chest, in their choices, in the way they treat those they love, then you'll never truly die. You will walk with them, through every war not yet fought, through every silence that needs to be broken, through every generation that forgets and then remembers and then promises, never again. And though your body lies in the earth, your soul stands tall, unburied, undefeated, not by bullets, not by time, not by forgetting, because some stories don't end. They become part of the world, like wind, like rivers, like roots beneath the surface of the land you once returned to. You are there, and because you are still here, woven into the quiet fabric of the world, every time someone pauses to wonder what it truly means to survive, to carry pain and still offer love, they are listening to you. Not to the gunfire or the marching or the roaring speeches, but to that small, persistent voice that whispered in your chest when the world was crumbling. Hold on, just a little longer. And you did. You held on through the freezing nights and the aching hunger. You held on when your friends didn't come back, when your letters stopped arriving, when hope felt like a myth. You held on even when you didn't know why. And because you did, a family was born, a village healed, a future unfolded. That child who reads your story might never face a war like yours, but they'll face their own trenches. Loss, fear, loneliness, pain they don't yet have words for. And when they do, they'll remember you. Not your name, perhaps. Not your uniform. But the feeling of you, your resilience, your quiet defiance, your choice to live on even with shaking hands. They'll remember that survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about staying human. About crying and still being kind. About carrying grief without letting it become cruelty. About knowing what the world can take from you and still giving something beautiful back. And so, with every act of gentleness that follows, with every war averted, every hand held, every story told instead of buried, you win again. Not the war, not the battle, but something far greater. The right to be remembered as more than a soldier. The right to be remembered as a man who chose peace, even when the world didn't. And in the end, that's what lasts. Not the medals, not the victories carved in stone, but the soft things, the laughter of a grandchild echoing down the hallway, the sound of wind through the orchard you once planted, the way someone folds a blanket for another, quietly, gently, without being asked. Those are your footprints now. And long after every history book is rewritten, long after the trenches fade into green fields and even the stars that watched over you burn out, you will still be here, in every heart that chooses to remember, in every life shaped by your courage, in every whisper of peace that rises, despite the noise of the world. Somewhere, a mother rocks her child to sleep during a storm, humming a tune that has no words, only a melody passed down unknowingly from the lullabies once sung in candlelit silence when fathers were away at war. That melody carries you, in its simplicity, in its comfort. Somewhere else, a young man stares out the window of a train, traveling to visit a battlefield preserved in quiet reverence. He doesn't know what he's looking for, only that something about that place pulls at him. He walks the fields, reads the names, touches the rusted wire in the museum, and for a moment, just a moment, he imagines you there. Not as a relic of the past, but as someone alive waiting for dawn. And perhaps most of all, somewhere in the world, someone is on the edge of giving up. Their war isn't fought with rifles or bayonets, but with grief, loneliness, despair. They feel unseen, unheard. The trenches of their heart are deep. But then they hear your story, and something changes. Not all at once, not with fanfare, but slowly, quietly. They start to believe that if you could survive the mud, the loss, the silence, if you could come home and rebuild, if you could laugh again, love again, then maybe they can too. They're not sure how, or when, or if it will ever feel whole again. But they decide to hold on. One more day, one more breath, and just like that, you've saved someone 100 years after your war ended. Not with a weapon, but with memory, with humanity, with the truth that some wounds never close completely, but healing is still possible. That survival doesn't have to be loud. It can be quiet, steady, ordinary. It can be the simple act of waking up, planting a flower, writing a letter, sharing a meal. And so your legacy is not carved into cold stone. It's written in warmth, in the unseen moments that ripple through time, in every life made softer by your story, in every choice that bends toward kindness because someone, somewhere remembered you. You were a soldier, but you were also a son, a friend, a dreamer, a survivor, and now forever, a teacher. A quiet voice in the dark, telling the world that even in its ugliest hour, humanity can endure. So when someone asks, not just in a book, not just in a classroom, but deep in their heart, could I survive a war like that? Let the answer rise not from fear or strength or pride, but from your story. And let it say, yes, not because you won, but because you came back, and you chose to love the world again. And that is the greatest victory of all. To love the world again after seeing what it's capable of. To step into the same streets, the same fields, the same seasons that once brought you pain, and still greet them with open hands. That takes more courage than any charge across no man's land. You didn't return to a hero's welcome. There were no fireworks, no parades in the trenches. Just a long walk home, a worn pair of boots, and a silence that stretched through the years like fog. But even in that silence you built something. A life, a family, a small patch of peace. And you did it quietly, without asking for applause, without demanding the world understand. Because deep down you knew the war had taken enough already. It didn't deserve your heart too. So you gave your heart to other things. To the soil as you tilled it for spring planting. To the bread you baked in the morning just the way your mother used to. To the child who cried at night and whom you held until they dreamed. To the neighbor who'd lost a son and needed someone to fix the gate, even though neither of you had the words to speak of the war. These were not grand gestures, but they were sacred, because each one whispered, I am still here. I am still human. And that whisper lives on, not just in your descendants or in those who study your war, but in every person who decides, today, tomorrow, generations from now, to meet cruelty with compassion and fear with patience. Your story didn't end in the mud. It didn't end with the armistice or when the last shell fell silent. It continued with every step you took after. Every time you stood in the shadow of all you lost and said, I will keep going. That strength, it doesn't fade. It flows through time like a river under ice, quiet, powerful, shaping the land in ways most will never see. But it's there. You're part of that river now, guiding the lost, soothing the broken, reminding the world in 1,000 small ways what it means to endure without becoming hardened, to survive without becoming cruel, to carry the memory of war not as a weapon, but as a seed of peace. And maybe one day far from now, a war will begin to rise again in the hearts of men. And someone who never knew your name, will feel a weight they can't explain. A feeling that this has happened before. A quiet resistance. A voice inside that says, no, we've already bled for this. Someone lived through it once, and they chose peace. So can we. And just like that, you'll have saved the world again. Not with your rifle, but with your memory. And so, even in the smallest corners of the world, places you never walked, skies you never saw, your presence endures. It echoes in the way someone stops to listen instead of shout, in the way a hand reaches for another before it turns into a fist, in the way a child learns history not through flags or victories, but through faces, your face, etched into yellowing photos and stories told in quiet reverence. You are not just history, you are conscience. You are the soft voice reminding us of what we're capable of, for better or worse. Because you lived the worse. You crawled through it, bled through it, watched your friends vanish into it. And still, when the sun rose again, when the trains ran again, when letters started arriving again, you didn't turn your back on the world. You stayed. And that simple act, staying, became everything. It taught those around you how to grieve without growing bitter, how to remember without being consumed, how to rebuild without forgetting who you were before. And perhaps that's what survival really is. Not coming home in one piece, but coming home and choosing to be whole again, even in pieces. There's no monument tall enough to capture that, no medal heavy enough to honor it, but it lives on just the same. In every field that grows back after being torn apart, in every meal cooked with love, in every story passed down not to glorify war, but to make sure it never happens again. And in that passing down your voice remains, not loud, not commanding, but steady, human, says gently, I was there, it was real, it was hell, but I came back, and I made something good. So can you. And that is where your journey ends, not in silence, but in legacy, not in the mud, but in the memory, not as a name among millions, but as a light, flickering, fragile, and eternal, guiding us forward. Through the darkest parts of who we are, is something better, something gentler, something worth surviving for. Because of you, remember. And because we remember, we choose peace. And that choice, peace, is the true reward of your endurance. It's not flashy. It doesn't arrive with fanfare. It doesn't wear a uniform or march in step. It waits patiently like you once did for someone to notice it, for someone to choose it. And they do because of you. You taught us that war is not a story of heroes and villains. It's a story of people. Real people. Boys with cracked hands and shaking voices. Mothers with empty arms. Letters that never arrived. Meals never shared. Futures lost before they even had a name. You taught us that survival is not strength alone, but softness preserved despite every reason to turn hard. That the man who carries grief in silence and plants roses in the garden he once dug foxholes into, that man is a monument far greater than any statue. That the world is not changed by explosions, but by the quiet decisions made in living rooms, schoolyards, marketplaces, where someone somewhere says, I remember, I won't let it happen again. And those decisions ripple outward. A teacher rewrites a lesson plan to show the cost of war through poetry instead of numbers. A teenager, filled with questions, writes a letter to their grandfather. A veteran, long silent, finally speaks and someone listens. Two former enemies meet not to accuse but to understand. And always, your story is there just beneath the surface. Not to haunt, not to shame, but to guide. Because you are proof that even after the darkest night, we can choose to walk toward the dawn. Not unscarred, not unchanged, but willing to live, willing to forgive, willing to make this world a little softer, a little safer than the one you return to. And that willingness, that fragile, stubborn hope, is now part of us. Because of you, we look at war not as an inevitability, but as a choice. Because of you, we know what it cost. And because of you, we dare to imagine a world where no one else has to pay that price. You may not hear the thanks. You may not see the peace you planted grow. But it grows just the same. In every act of compassion. In every moment of silence before a careless word. In every generation that remembers not to forget. You survived the war. And now, through all of us, you survive the peace. And that peace, quiet, imperfect, unfinished, is the most precious thing we carry forward from you. It's not the kind of peace that's printed in treaties or spoken from podiums. It's smaller than that, slower, but stronger. It's the peace in a father's voice as he tells his child they're safe. It's in the hands that rebuild what bombs once shattered. It's in the way people learn to look each other in the eyes again, across borders, across wounds. It's the kind of peace that knows its own fragility, that understands it must be guarded not with weapons but with memory. And that memory is you. You don't rest under flags. You rest in the careful decisions made every day by those who walk through a world shaped by your pain, and choose again and again to protect what you never had enough of: stillness, dignity, mercy. That's the truth that textbooks can't fully explain. That's what gets missed in the numbers, the maps, the timelines. Because war is not just history, it's inheritance. And peace is not just an end, it's a promise. A promise you made when you returned home and planted a tree. When you fixed the broken fence for a neighbor who had nothing left. When you held your child and didn't talk about what you'd seen, but still made sure they never had to see it themselves. And now that tree gives shade. That fence still stands. That child grew up in a world you helped hold together. You may have thought in those quiet years that no one noticed. But we did. We notice now. And we carry it forward, not just as a story, not just as a tribute, but as a duty. To live lives gentle enough to honor your suffering. To hold each other with the same care you used to hold your rifle. Firmly, responsibly, knowing the weight of it. You didn't ask to be remembered, but you are. You didn't call yourself a hero, but you became one. Not because of how you fought, but because of how you healed. Because of how you taught the world, without even knowing it, that survival is not the end of a journey. It's the beginning of something greater. A chance to live for others. To speak when others are silent. To remember so the world doesn't repeat itself. You gave us that chance. And now, as your voice fades into the wind and your name becomes a whisper in the halls of time, know this: we will not forget. We will not let the world forget. Because the price you paid was too great. Because the lessons you gave were too sacred. And because peace, fragile as it is, deserves every breath we can give it. So sleep now, soldier. You've done enough. The world is watching. The world is learning. The world is still here. Because you were. And because you were, we are not the same. We walk differently through our days now. Not always with solemnity, but with awareness. That every freedom we enjoy, every quiet moment in a cafe, every laugh that rings out under a summer sky, was once impossible in a world you knew all too well. We don't always say it, but we feel it. In the silence before the national anthem. In the moment of stillness at a memorial stone. In the way a grandfather touches his lapel where no medal hangs, and looks away not because he forgets, but because he remembers everything. And in those spaces, those tiny invisible places where history meets the present, you are still alive. Not as a ghost, but as a guide. You show us the cost of hatred. You show us the slow, painful rise of cruelty. And you show us, above all, how to stop it. You remind us that it doesn't begin with armies. It begins with words, with apathy, with forgetting. And so we don't forget. We tell your story. We tell it softly, truthfully, painfully, beautifully. Not to glorify, but to humanize. To remind this world that you were not a symbol or a number. You were a person who had dreams before the war. A person who bled in silence during it. A person who somehow, against all odds, stepped into the quiet afterward and began again. That is where your power lives. In the after. In the rebuilding. In the quiet miracles of peace that you never got credit for, but which changed everything. Because every kindness given after pain is a kind of rebellion. Every moment of love after loss is a form of bravery. Every time someone chooses to speak up instead of staying silent is a torch passed from your trembling hand to ours. And now we hold it. The flame is small, but bright, and we guard it with all we have. Not just for you, but because of you. because your life meant something, and your suffering was not in vain, and your story, your real story, not the one written in textbooks but the one carved in the soul, has shaped a world that still has a chance. So when we say, never again, we're not speaking into the past. We're speaking into tomorrow, into every conflict still smoldering, every young voice still uncertain, every leader still tempted by power instead of peace. And in that moment, your spirit rises again, not in fear, but in hope, because you gave us the map, because you walked through fire and came back with a seed. And now, in every act of courage, in every act of love, we plant that seed again. And those seeds, you wouldn't believe how they've grown. They've taken root in places you never imagined, in cities rebuilt from rubble, in classrooms where students trace your footsteps on old trench maps, not to learn how war is fought, but to understand why it should never be fought again. In stories written not about battles won, but about moments survived. Somewhere, a young artist paints a canvas inspired by your letters. Somewhere else, a writer pens a novel where you are not just a soldier, but a boy, a friend, a brother who once loved poetry and feared the dark. In another place, a musician takes your last journal entry and turns it into a song that makes strangers weep without knowing exactly why. They're all planting your memory, tending to it, letting it grow into something gentle, something meaningful, something living. Because memory, when handled with care, becomes more than history. It becomes guidance. And you, soldier, have become that guidance. In a world still cracked by violence and division, you are the quiet voice that reminds us to look closer, to see the human behind the uniform, to hear the silence between the gunfire, to feel the weight of peace and carry it like the sacred thing it is. You've taught us that war doesn't truly end when the fighting stops. It ends when we stop repeating it, when we listen, when we learn, when we change. That change is slow, messy, incomplete, but it's happening because of the stories passed from trembling hands to curious hearts, because of the photos pulled from dusty boxes and placed in young palms, because of the simple, powerful question, could you survive as a soldier in World War I? And the more important answer, you shouldn't have had to. That truth settles deep in us, and with it a vow, not written in ink but in action, to live lives that don't waste the peace you gave us, to build futures that don't need soldiers like you, to speak the hard truths even when they make others uncomfortable, to reach across borders, across generations, across silences. And one day when a new voice asks us what war was like, what you endured, what you sacrificed, what it meant, we'll tell them the story, not with glory, not with spectacle, but with honesty. We'll tell them how you stood in the mud and didn't let it take your soul, how you held on to something soft inside even when the world tried to crush it, how you came home and without ever knowing it, began to change the future. And we'll say, he lived, he remembered, so we could choose better. And if we are very lucky, they will. And when they do, when they choose better, your story will become more than remembrance. It will become redemption. Not redemption for the war itself. That can never be redeemed. No victory, no treaty, no patriotic myth can erase the brutality you endured. But redemption for what came after. For what you refused to let die within you, even when the world around you was breaking. The part of you that still believed in kindness, that still believed in humanity, that still reached out, across silence, across grief, across the years. That belief became a legacy. And legacies, when carried with love, outlive even the darkest days. Somewhere your great-grandchild walks past your old photo on the wall. Maybe they don't know the full story yet, but they stop. They look at your eyes, and something lingers in them, something quiet and steady and real. A question forms, not how did he survive, but how can I honor that survival? And so they begin to live more consciously. They step into the world with gentler hands. They ask questions others won't. They see people not by where they come from, but by who they are. They push back against hate, against cruelty, against the numbness that so easily grows when history is forgotten. And in doing that, they become part of your story. A living chapter. Proof that your pain wasn't wasted. Proof that what you endured didn't just end in mud. It turned into meaning. They might never march or wear a helmet or write a letter home by candlelight in a rain-soaked trench. But they will fight. In their own way. They will fight for dignity. For truth. For the kind of world you once dreamed of when you looked up at a night sky too full of smoke. And the story continues. Passed from one set of hands to another. A story not of war, but of what it takes to truly come back from it. And it will reach farther than you could have ever imagined. Across languages, across continents, across time itself. Because every story told with care becomes a shelter. And every shelter becomes a promise. And your promise is this, that even when the world falls apart, even when the guns fall silent and the ash settles, what matters most is how we rebuild. Not just the buildings, but the people. And so long as someone remembers that, so long as someone chooses softness after suffering, you will never be truly gone. You will be in the footsteps of the teacher who reminds their students of the cost of violence. In the ink of the writer who chooses nuance over noise. In the soul of the peacemaker who speaks softly and is heard anyway. And you will be in us, quiet, steady, a compass pointing not toward the past, but toward the future you never got to see, but helped make possible. And that future, the one you carved out not with bullets, but with your return, with your healing, with your quiet courage, is here now waiting to be honored. You may not have known as you stepped back into civilian life with hands that still shook and dreams that broke in the night, that you were building something eternal. But you were. Every small choice you made in peace became an act of resistance against the war that tried to claim you. When you held your child for the first time and didn't flinch. When you tended a garden because you couldn't bear to touch a weapon again. When you sat at a table and chose silence over rage. You were shaping the world. And now, long after your final breath, that world speaks your name in ways you never imagined. In museums where children trace the outline of your helmet in glass and whisper questions to their parents. In novels where your story lives again, painted in prose that aches with truth. In monuments where strangers pause, not to glorify but to feel. But most of all, you live in the quiet victories. In the handshake between old enemies at a veterans' gathering. In the refugee welcomed at a border once closed by fear. In the voice of a child who asks not who won, but who suffered and why. That child is your legacy. That question is your triumph. Because it means they're listening. And if they're listening, there's hope. Hope that the world you returned to, bruised and breathless, can still become the world you dreamed of in the trenches. One where peace is not the pause between wars, but the language of life itself. Where dignity is not earned through bloodshed, but granted through understanding. Where survival isn't just something you do, but something you transform. You were not just a soldier. You were a human being thrust into hell who crawled out somehow still carrying light. That light didn't burn out. It passed on. And it flickers now in all of us. In every act of compassion. In every effort to listen, to learn, to hold space for pain without turning away. In every step we take toward a gentler world. So when someone asks, could you survive as a soldier in World War I? Let the answer be more than survival. Let it be this. You did more than survive. You returned. You remembered. And you made the world remember too. And now we live not just because you lived, but so your life might mean something more than war ever could. That is your victory. That is your peace. And it endures. And so your story ends not in the mud-soaked fields of France, nor in the shattered villages where war once roared. It ends here, quietly, resolutely within us. You were not just a name etched on a memorial or a faded photo in a drawer. You were a heartbeat in history, a thread in the vast human tapestry woven from both suffering and strength. You walked through hell not to be remembered as a warrior, but to show us what it means to be human in the face of inhumanity. Your legacy is not the war you fought, but the peace you dared to seek after it ended. We carry your memory not as a burden but as a responsibility. To live with open eyes, to speak when silence is dangerous, to build when others destroy, to remember when it would be easier to forget. Because of you, we know that courage is not just on the battlefield. It's in forgiveness, in rebuilding, in choosing love after loss. So rest now. You've done your part. The weight you carried is now in our hands. And we promise, on quiet nights, on stormy days, through laughter and through tears, to honor you, not just with words or wreaths or songs, but with the choices we make. To live better, to love deeper, to never forget, because you survived the war, and through you, so did we.